laws or attitudes that we still use today. So it's amazing in the Torah, this combination. So I would like to actually, read them and discuss some of the highlight ones and see how far we get. I know the one we must talk about is lex talionis, which is the famous law of an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. That's in this. But in the context, it actually tells us something else. So we're going to start at the beginning. And the beginning, interestingly enough, starts with slavery. The first laws are about slavery or servitude. And the commentators say that the ancient Israelites, this is like the stuff that I feel is like in context of the times. They couldn't imagine a time when there wouldn't be slavery. So they legislated laws, and they had just come out of slavery. So, I mean, when you think about that, it's like, well, we know what it's like to be really badly treated as a slave. So the first thing we're going to talk about is how to treat slaves. And when you think of it that way, that they just were themselves were slaves, it makes sense that this would be one of the first laws that they would be concerned with, which is something I hadn't thought about till I was reading more commentary about it. Now, the kind of slavery they talk about here is a Jewish or a Hebrew slave, and really it's more like an indentured servant. You sell yourself because you can't pay your debts or you can't live, so you sell yourself into servitude for 6 years. And, the 7th year you go free. So we're going to look at the very first verses. These are the laws that are set before them. And then we go right to talking about slaves or servants. So does somebody want to read as opposed to me reading all the time? I've really been talking for hours now. Who has the text that would like to read? Anyone?
I can read.
Okay, Jennifer. Oh, Susan, but I don't see you. But I see Jennifer.
I'm going to try. Okay, go for Jennifer there. I'm trying to come in.
Oh, I can default to you.
Jennifer, go ahead.
Okay, got it. Tell me when to stop. When you acquire a Hebrew slave, he shall serve 6 years. In the 7th year, he shall go free without payment.
Okay, so that's free. In other words, he doesn't have to pay anything.
Mm-hmm.
They work for you. And the 7th year is, a kind of Shabbat. Sorry. A kind of Shabbat in every way for the land, for us personally. It's just, yes. So he doesn't have to pay anything. He doesn't owe you anything. Continue.
If he came single, he shall leave single. If he had a wife, his wife shall leave with him. If his master gave him a wife and she has borne him children, the wife and her children shall belong to the master, and he shall leave alone. But go ahead.
We could have a problem with that, but the commentaries say that really he has no way to take care of these children and wife. And so the master is responsible for them is the way that they're framing it. Though I think you'd be very upset if you had a wife and children and you had to leave alone. But perhaps he's allowed to come back and buy his family when he has money. But right now it says if he has a wife, if he comes with a wife, she goes with him. If he had his master gave him a wife, then she still belongs to the master. Continue a little more.
Mm-hmm. But if the slave declares, I love my master and my wife and children, I do not wish to go free. His master shall take him before God. He shall be brought to the door of the doorpost, and his master shall pierce his ear with an awl, and he shall then remain his slave for life.
Okay, so you can choose to stay with your master, but even if you are a slave in other places, it says how you're not allowed to beat your slave, you're not allowed to abuse your slave has Shabbat off. If you think about the ancient world where I always think of these old movies from like Ben-Hur or whatever, where they would literally solder the slave in the galley to the ore, and they just lived there their whole lives till they died. They never even got up. There was no rest ever. So even for the time in particular, the treatment of a slave was probably the most humane in the world until we stopped having slaves. But they couldn't imagine that, especially this, as we know, this generation had a real slave mentality, that they could not even handle freedom very well. And they were constantly romanticizing slavery, actually, and talking about it in the past as something they wish they hadn't left when things went wrong. So for them, this was probably considered really good treatment. Any questions or comments about that as we're going along? I'd love to hear from you. Yes, Jennifer.
Well, and that's it. It's just questionable how they're using how the slave is using the word love, that he loves his master. That just seems odd in the context he's his indentured servant. So.
Yeah, I'm looking if there's a comment about that. I guess if you're attached to the family, we can't imagine it.
No.
But and you have room and board and you have a day off and whatever, and you're working and you're taking care of it. It's a live-in kind of slave, so to speak, and you're covered. Some people just, they're happy there, I guess. We can't imagine it. I can't imagine it, but okay. Now let's look at this man selling his daughter story, which is pretty interesting. Who wants to read verse 7?
I have a question though.
Please.
We skipped the all part, piercing.
No, we didn't. We read about.
Okay. Any comment on that?
I have no idea where that comes from. This idea that you basically make a hole in his ear and you probably put something in there like a earring or something. It's basically giving your, a pierced ear.
Right.
To the doorpost. I don't know.
So I thought he pierced. I read it wrong because I thought he pierced the thing to the door, but it's just brought before. That's because that was pretty icky. Okay, when a man
wait a minute, Benjamin, where are you? You have a question?
I'm over here.
Okay.
It seems
yeah.
Putting a piercing, or we don't know exactly what they were doing, but maybe like a piercing.
Yeah.
That's like a physically, touching somebody. That's a pretty heavy duty thing. So you're saying slavery wasn't so bad, it was their normal, but here you're marking that person. It's a mark.
I didn't say it wasn't so bad. I said.
I'm sorry, Rabbi. That's not what I meant.
You know what I mean? Yeah, I agree.
I apologize, but that slavery was their normal. That's what they knew.
They did, and they're saying so. Basically, I imagine that he pierced his ear, and they probably put in a ring or something, and that was a sign this person was a slave. Just like you would be marked wherever you went, with like a tattoo or something.
Yeah,
you're right. Listen, we stopped doing it.
Hopefully, thank you.
This was written, around 3,000 years ago. So the mentality was completely different in these social norms. And that's why what's so great about Judaism is we just said, no, we don't do that anymore. That's maybe once, but we don't have any slaves at all. And so you're right, though. It's like a branding is what you're saying. Correct. It is like a branding.
It's
okay.
Like
they did that because they talked about piercing before with earrings and things in Genesis, the women.
Yeah, but that was the women they wore earrings. You mean for jewelry?
For jewelry.
Yeah, for jewelry. But this was
but
probably
the commentary that I'm reading said it was a sign of permanent slave status.
Exactly.
Right. That's what I said too.
But I imagine it wasn't just a hole in your ear, unless it was a big hole. I imagine there was something in it. I would imagine.
I would think so.
Yeah, but it wouldn't be the same as jewelry. It would be some slave symbol, probably.
Right.
Okay. Susan.
Okay. When a man sells his daughter as a slave, she shall not be freed as male slaves are. If she proves to be displeasing to her master, who designated her for himself, he must let her be redeemed. He shall not have the right to sell her to outsiders, since he broke faith with her. And if he designated her for his sons, he shall deal with her as is the practice with free maidens. If he marries another, he must not withhold from this one her food, her clothing, or her conjugal rights. If he fails her in these 3 ways, she shall go free without payment.
Okay, so if you look at the commentary, this is like pretty shocking. A man sells his daughter, but the commentary says in the ancient world, a father driven by poverty might sell his daughter to a wealthy family to ensure her future security. The sale presupposes marriage to the master or his son, with the Torah stipulating the girl must be treated as a wife. So I guess, again, this is something we can't imagine, but, I think about in the actually had a cousin. We heard about people who couldn't afford to take care of their children during, in the 1900s, 1910s, 20s, and they would put them in orphanages, even though they weren't orphans, because they could not feed them. And sadly, we know that, in like China or in other countries, people would give their children for adoption because they couldn't afford to take care of them. And so I think this is considered in that same realm, according to the rabbis, that, she's going to be, they say servant here, but here it says slave. He sells his daughter, but they're buying her as a wife, is what it seems to be implying. And if he doesn't like her, he must let her be redeemed, meaning her father can buy her back, that she can be, and he can't sell her to anyone else. If he's not happy with her, he can't pass her along. So, and if his son marries her, she has the rights of a daughter. So she's like in the family. And if he takes a second wife, he still has to provide for her. And if he doesn't want to, she can go free. So there's a lot of obligations on taking on a girl. So you wouldn't do it so quickly unless you were serious, because you have a lot of responsibilities and legal requirements if you take on this girl. On the other hand, we don't really hear what the girl has to say. What, Jeff?
This could occur as young as 3 years old.
Where does it say that?
It doesn't, but from other reading, I've read that it was perfectly acceptable after age 3 to sell, indenture, or otherwise move children you couldn't afford.
Or you would raise the child. I think about, even in the time of Henry VIII, which was I'm very, my hobby is the Tudors and that whole Elizabethan era, that young girls would be sent to serve queens. They could be 10, 11 years old. They would be sent to go live in the court and basically serve, the queen, and they would grow up there and then they would be married off. So I guess people saw it as a way to feed and protect your child or your daughter. And it's interesting that there's a special treatment for a girl as opposed to a son. They don't mention anything about selling your son. I guess you didn't sell your son.
They're too valuable.
Yeah, you didn't sell your sons. You kept your daughter. But if you did, they tried to protect her. Again, this is something we can't imagine. But people have done it, even into the 20th century, or who knows what's going on in some really impoverished parts of the world. Yes, Phyllis.
So I think you were just saying that throughout history, people have sold their children, and they're still doing it now. And
Okay.
this actually
Well, I could probably leave my class early.
This protects them.
protects them more than what our reality is with.
You don't want to wait till 1:45?
I don't know how to mute her.
In a half hour.
Yeah, mute her.
Hannah, are you there? Okay, go ahead. Phyllis, go ahead.
Well, I was finished.
Yes, I'm here.
Can you mute Jennifer? Mel?
Yes.
Oh,
Yes, yes.
Okay.
No, I participate.
Okay. Go ahead, Phyllis.
I think I'm done.
Oh, I think you're right. It does protect them in a way. If we're going in that direction, there's a lot of protections for that time. Jennifer, we muted you because we could hear your conversation. You could unmute her now. It's okay. It's okay. You could unmute her, Hannah, now.
Okay.
Okay. So now
Don't unmute me. It's okay. I had no idea I was on live. Sorry.
that's okay. All right. So that's the servants, the slavery part. And then it goes into personal injury, which now we'll look at this because this starts to get into the lex talionis of this idea of an eye for an eye, a tooth. So does anyone like to read verse 12? Who would like to read
Well,
verse?
when I find it. Oh,
Okay,
Jeff.
verse 12.
I can do it.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. He who fatally strikes a man shall be put to death. If he did not do it by design, but it came about by an act of God, I will assign you a place to which he can flee.
Okay, let's just stop there. So murder, there is capital punishment. However, the rabbis, the Talmud said you have to have, in order to convict someone of murder, 2 eyewitnesses, which is pretty not that common. 2 eyewitnesses. And they talk about, they say, and Rabbi Akiba said, anyone who executes one person in 70 years is a bloodthirsty court. So, it was very rare that they would actually have capital punishment because you had to have 2 people swear under oath in the court that you saw it. That person, they would be put to death. On the other hand, manslaughter or accidental death, I should say, which is that there would be these, it's explained in another place, I think in the book of Numbers. They were these cities of refuge that were set up where people could run to because they were trying to stop these revenge killings, which was common in the ancient world and as a vicious cycle. So in order to prevent revenge killings, if you accidentally killed someone, there were 6 cities that would be set up in the land of Israel where they were considered cities of refuge or like sanctuary cities, so to speak. And no one could take revenge, and the person would have to live there, though. You couldn't leave the city until the Kohen HaGadol, the high priest, died. For some reason, they linked it to when the high priest died, then the person could leave. But until then, that's where you would go. But if anyone, kills someone deliberately and they try to run for sanctuary, it's not going to be considered valid, and they would be put to death. Okay, now here's something for parents. Who's reading? Who was reading?
I can continue.
Okay, continue.
All right. When a man schemes against another and kills him treacherously, you shall take him from my very altar to be put to death.
Okay, that's the one I talked about. So go to the next couple of.
He who strikes his father or his mother shall be put to death. He who kidnaps a man, whether he has sold him or is still holding him, shall be put to death. He who insults his father or his mother shall be put to death.
Okay, so it says insults in the JPS translation, which is not correct. It's curse. He who curses his father or mother shall be put to death. So the idea of, and actually one who attacks their father or their mother is put to death is part of a later, the rabbis say, law where it's a son who's it's mainly a son, disobedient, who's a drunkard, who's a criminal, and they can't control him. He's out of control. And then he attacks his parents, and they keep mother and father on the same level as you see, if cursing was considered so strong. And again, we know that they almost never did this. And how do we know? Because according to the commentary in the Talmud, both the mother and the father had to agree to the punishment. And the mother would rarely agree to these punishments. They really had to both be on the same page. And so it rarely happened. But it was a frightening law that I'm sure helped to keep people in line, but it's quite harsh. But this is like the most out of control child, and both parents had to agree, and they say the mother would rarely agree. That's why they put both of them. Okay, so let's do, who would like to read now? These are like these very interesting civil laws of damages, human damages, and a huge law about abortion comes from what we're going to read in a minute. So who would like to read?
I'll read. Is that starting with 18?
18, yeah.
When men quarrel and one strikes the other with stone or fist, and he does not die but has to take to his bed, if he then gets up and walks outdoors upon his staff, the assailant shall go unpunished, except that he must pay for his idleness and his cure.
Okay, so what that really means, idleness means the work that you miss, the time that you are unable to work, and the cure means his medical bills. His medical bills.
Get up and walk, you must be cured. That's how I read it.
Maybe not. Maybe you get up after 2 weeks or 3 weeks.
Right.
And maybe you have to pay for the doctor bills.
Right.
And you have to pay for the work that you missed, the time that you were not working. And from this, we learn that faith healing is not something in Judaism, that we believe in medicine, that we believe in doctors. Maimonides, Rambam was a doctor. And that Rambam, actually, when he was saying what every village must require, a Jewish town, it's fascinating. You have to have a study house, a bathhouse, a synagogue, a place that, like a poverty society, a burial, to feed the poor, a burial society, and you need to have a doctor in a Jewish town. So this idea of medicine was very forward thinking from a very ancient time. That's what every Jewish town required, that you should have a doctor there and a rabbi, but you needed a doctor. So, and then in the Talmud, what's so interesting is they expanded on this, and American law actually uses the Talmud for this, because they also added pain and suffering in the Talmud you need to pay for. And if the injury diminished your value or your worth, let's say you were a painter and you hurt your eye and you no longer could do your art. Sorry, I'm really dry. Or if a beautiful girl was scarred and now she couldn't get the same kind of husband or whatever, you would pay for that as well. So there were 5 different damages, different kinds of damages that you would have to pay for if you harm someone, which was very forward thinking. To think about pain and suffering, to me, is amazing that they thought about that at that time and understood that.
And you buy insurance for it now.
Yeah, but if you didn't, the Talmud said, you need to pay for all of these things to compensate someone if you harm them. Okay. So now let's go to, keep going, Merle.
When a man strikes his slave, male or female, with a rod, and he dies there, and then he must be avenged. But if he survives a day or 2, he is not to be avenged, since he is the other's property.
Okay, so a commentary says, to harm a slave is to inflict harm on a human being as a bearer of God's image. No other ancient society and few pre-modern societies granted slaves this measure of humanity. But even so, if they die later, you don't pay for it. So it's in between unacceptable and, it's just their view of slavery. This stuff to me is all like from the ancient world that we don't, really. Okay, now here's the thing that this is the beginning of medical ethics about abortion. So somebody like to read this, verse 22. Sorry, I'm really dry.
If a man shall fight and they collide with a pregnant woman and she miscarries, but there will be no fatality. He shall surely be punished as the husband of the woman shall cause to be assessed against him, and he shall pay it by order of the judges. But if there shall be a fatality, then you shall award a life for a life, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, a hand for a hand, a foot for a foot, a burn for a burn, a wound for a wound, a bruise for a bruise.
So first of all, it says, if you hurt a woman, you knock her down and she has a miscarriage, you pay damages. And from this, the rabbi says that therefore a fetus is not recognized as a human being because it's not murder. It's not considered a person. If the woman dies, it's considered a death of a human being. So there's punishment, but it's just damages. And from this, the rabbis say that we, first of all, prize the mother's life over the fetus, and that a fetus is not a full human being. That being said, if you look at what the Talmud says, you cannot what's the word I want to say? Capriciously have an abortion. You cannot capriciously say, oh, I don't want to have this child, I'm having an abortion. And even today, if I don't like the sex of this child, I'm having an abortion. The only time that they really, and 1 second, Jennifer, I'm going to call on you, recognize abortion is if it's going to harm the life, emotional, mental, or physical life of the mother. Meaning psychological life. If you say, I just can't have another child, I've got 5 children, I can't handle it, I'm, or I'm depressed, or I get postpartum, whatever. I mean, you'll go to consult with your rabbi, you can get permission for an abortion because the mother's life takes precedence, but you can't just say, I don't want to do it, or this is, not the right time, or I don't want to get fat or whatever, and have an abortion. Jennifer.
Sorry, I didn't know. Yeah. Hey, how did we know there, aside from rabbinical interpretation, how did we know when it says in, verse 22, but there is no serious injury? How did we know that was to the mother versus the prematurely born baby?
Because it says, they've already said if a miscarriage results, which is the ultimate serious injury of the pregnancy, you pay money.
Oh, where did it say? Because it says he hits a pregnant woman and she just gives birth prematurely.
Prematurely means a miscarriage.
Okay, sorry. Yeah,
that's okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's that translation. There's different translations. They mean a miscarriage, but there's no serious injury to the mother. That's what they mean. Okay, now, but if there's serious injury, you take a life for a life, an eye for an eye, tooth for tooth. Okay, so the rabbis say, we're not talking about literally taking an eye or a tooth or a hand or a foot. We're talking about damages. This is in the section of damages, and it's the monetary value plus the other damages that we talked about. If you lose an eye and then it ruins your career or your profession, it ruins your ability to get a husband, it's pain and suffering, and you're mortified and you're depressed or whatever, you pay for all of that, which is, when you think about it, a lot more valuable than just poking out the other person's eye. Then what? That hasn't done anything for you. But getting all these damages and compensation to help you recover, and your medical bills, so it doesn't make sense. Cutting off a person's foot is not going to do anything for you. I've lost your foot, as opposed to paying for your therapy, your doctors, your everything. So absolutely. And this is often misunderstood, certainly by non-Jewish readers of the Bible, that it's a literal, this tit for tat kind of retaliation or punishment, but it's not at all. All right, so I think we've done enough of the damages, but so I'd like to move on to.
Can I ask a question before we move?
Of course.
How did they determine the monetary value of damages?
How do they do it today?
Yeah.
I guess they evaluate, how much you would have earned over your lifetime if you had both feet. What did you earn before when you had 2 feet? And what are you losing now that you only have 1 foot? How terrible, how long did you stay home? How much pain were you in? I mean, I think it's the same that we do now. How do we determine it now?
Now it's based on what you earned, what you're capable of earning, and if you can even go back to work.
Right, but what about pain and suffering? How do you establish?
Well, there's Arnie's not home, otherwise I could get him to explain it. But it's a compensation formula that's in the insurance plan, and people like, all artists of all kinds, whether you're a theater artist, art artist, people buy it in case something were to happen to them and they can't perform their particular job anymore.
Right, but that's insurance. But I'm sure the courts, the judges, and it was, a panel of judges and rabbis were consulted and talked to the person and made a determination.
And a lot of that's the same concept now.
Right. Yeah. So, okay.
I have one thing just before you. I think this is really interesting. I think that this Mishpatim and Yitro are the two most important chapters in the Bible in terms of ethical conduct. It just occurred to me there are no punitive damages.
No.
Punitive costs in here. So that might be a more contemporary concept.
Wait, what do you mean by punitive?
I mean, the punishment is death, or I think, though, in the Talmud, they talk about some kind of jail or some kind of punishment. But you're right, in the Torah, it's either, paying for the damages as opposed to punishing. I mean, that might be, it's more practical. Right. Fine. Now you have to pay all this, take care of all this. I wanted to turn now to Exodus 22. And
Can I just ask a quick question?
Of course.
Were these laws compiled sort of all at around the same time, or hundreds of, or many years would go by and they'd realize this was a problem and that was a problem?
This chapter was probably written as one piece. When it was written, it seems that perhaps they added things as time went on, because some of it is about slavery, which was happening, in very ancient times, and then some of it is about when you live in a country, sort of civil laws. So we don't really know, but a lot of them are extremely wise and amazingly, having a lot of foresight and considerations, considering how, most societies treated the common man and woman. Certainly the aristocrats got a special treatment, or the higher, the rich and the elite, but that even the servant the slave had some rights, and that the common man who just lived, a modest life was still protected. I think is pretty, amazing. I wanted to see if the thing about I wanted to talk about lending money, because I thought that was very, very interesting. So, let's go to social responsibility. Wait, all right, let me see. Okay.
Excuse me. This is Janet Rappaport.
Yes.
Along the question that was just asked to you, I don't read Hebrew, but when you see these in Hebrew, does it mention the word Jew or Israelite?
Just a person, just a man or a woman. It doesn't mention Jew at all. The only thing it does mention is how to treat a stranger or a non-Jew. And they say you need to be very compassionate and inclusive.
Yeah, but it says non-Jew, right?
It says stranger, foreigner or stranger.
Because I don't think these people were considered Jewish yet at the mountain. They were
Israelite.
Right.
Yes,
exactly.
Absolutely correct. They were Israelites. But they just talked about men or women or whatever. And then except for the stranger, they talk a lot about the stranger.
Right, because it wasn't until the time of Jacob in the tribes that they were Jews.
No, they were Israelites. Jacob's name was Israel. That was
Right.
his second name. All of his descendants were Israelites. If we wanted to have a little tangent, I'll explain that there were 12 tribes.
Right.
Each tribe went by their own name, like you were an Ephraimite or a Benjaminite. And the people who were from the country, this tribe of Judah,
Right.
Jews or the Yehudi. And after King Solomon, the country basically had a civil war and split into two kingdoms. The kingdom of Israel, which had 12 tribes in it, and the kingdom of Judah, which had 2 tribes. And all the kingdom of Judah, those people were Jews. And the other ones were called Israelites, part of the kingdom of Israel. And in
722.
722. Thank you, Susan. In 722, the 10 tribes of Israel were conquered by the Assyrians, and they were taken off into captivity and they disappeared. Those are the 10 lost tribes.
Right. Yes.
And what was left were the Jews. We're all from Judah. So that's why we're called Jews. So that didn't happen until, the 700s BCE that we were suddenly called Jews. Before then, we were all called Israelites, or the people of Israel, the children of Israel.
Right. I was just asking about these laws were given to Israelites.
Correct. They were given to Israelites. Given to us, because according to the Midrash, every Jewish soul, past, present, and future, was present at Mount Sinai.
Right.
Received the 10 Commandments, and that's why there's a dating site today called Saw You at Sinai, where
Great.
No.
The one.
Love
Saw
it.
You at Sinai. So I want to go to social responsibility, which would be chapter 23. Let me see.
Well, Rabbi, these are all social responsibilities too. Like 33 seems to me very contemporary today too, which is the pit.
Wait, where is it? 33.
2133, when a man opens,
2133.
I think all of these are social responsibilities.
When a man opens a pit or digs a pit and does not cover it, and an ox or an ass falls into it, the one responsible for the pit must make restitution. He shall pay the price to the owner, but shall keep the dead animal. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's that civil law of damages of, they're all social, but it's all about damages. And, there's a whole tractate of the Talmud just on damages that goes deeper and deeper into this. But we only have like 15 minutes. Okay. So I'd like to get to some of the other stuff that I think is really interesting, which is, which is this one, the man, the seduces, 22:15, because this is very interesting about women and seduction and the value of a daughter or whatever. So does somebody want to read chapter 22, verse 15? Anybody?
If a man shall seduce a virgin who is not betrothed and lie with her, he shall provide her with a marriage contract as his wife. If her father refuses to give her to him, he shall weigh out silver according to the marriage contract of the virgins.
Okay, so in Hebrew, it says, so if a man seduces, this is not rape. This is seduce, talk her into it. And though they say this could be a girl as young as 11 or 12, and does she really have any ability to say no? They don't know, but it's not considered rape. But what it says, if the father refuses to give her, in Hebrew it says ima'on yima'en. The word is used twice, which means if the father, according to the rabbis, or the daughter refuse, that the daughter has the right to refuse marriage as well if she doesn't want to marry the guy. But it could be, I love him, I wanted to marry him, you wouldn't let us. he seduced me, and if she wants to, then he pays a bride price and he takes her. And if she doesn't want to, they still have to pay the bride price. So that's a daughter who's seduced. Then the next one is fascinating. You shall not tolerate a sorceress, which is a witch, or you're not allowed to have a witch, but you are allowed to have some prophecy. You could have a woman prophet. You could have interpretation, but you can't have like the witch of Endor, which they're really talking about, where you call a witch tries to raise the dead or do supernatural things. You're not allowed to have that in Judaism. And then it says, whoever lies with a beast shall be put to death. That's pretty clear how they're feeling. Whoever sacrifices to a god other than the Lord shall be proscribed, which means cut off, basically. And then again, 3 times just in this chapter alone, you shall not wrong a stranger or oppress him, for you are strangers in the land of Egypt. This particular commandment is mentioned 18 times in the Torah. Very important to not oppress the stranger, which means the non-Jewish person. I heard a very funny comedy act about a Jewish comic say, why do we call 99.1, whatever it is, more than 99% of the world non-Jews? We're the Jew, we're so small, but they're the non-Jews. It's funny to put them all in the same category. But the stranger, you need to not oppress and remember that we were strangers. And then this is all of the ethical teachings. You shall not ill-treat any widow or orphan. If you do mistreat them, I will heed their outcry as soon as they cry out to me, and my anger will blaze forth. So this is over and over in the prophets and to the stranger. And so anybody who's studied with me knows I always say this: if they keep saying don't do it, it means they're doing it a lot. They're doing it a lot. And so they keep repeating it. Why are you oppressing the stranger? Why are you mistreating the widow and the orphan? And it must have happened because they keep emphasizing it, and the Torah wouldn't if it wasn't a problem. So we see human nature here to really, there was a hierarchy and elitism and treating the poor to this day. I mean, we walk by the homeless on the street and just ignore them or mistreat them, or people will say, don't give them any money because they'll just use it for alcohol or whatever. I mean, terrible things, the way that we still mistreat the poor and the homeless. Okay, but this is something that most Jews or most don't know. Verse 24, would somebody like to read verse 24? This is pretty interesting about business and Jews. Okay, Susan, why don't you read?
If you lend money to my people, to the poor among you, do not act toward them as a creditor. Exact no interest from them.
So you're not allowed to take interest from another Jew, from your people, is what they're saying.
Mm-hmm. If you take your neighbor's garment in pledge, you must return it to him before the sun sets. It is his only clothing, the sole covering for his skin, and what else shall he sleep? Therefore, if he cries out to me, I will pay heed, for I am compassionate.
So even if you take collateral and it's their last thing, you have to return it by nightfall. And later on, it says, if somebody works for you, you're not allowed to keep their salary overnight. You need to pay a day laborer on the day. I've mentioned this. I always am very conscientious about paying my cleaning lady on the day that she works for me, because I don't know, how much she may need that money. I never say, oh, I'll pay you, I'll make it up to you next week. I'll go to the ATM just to make sure that she gets her money, because you're not the court. And this Torah law stays in my mind. You're not allowed to, and you shouldn't take collateral and keep it overnight. You shouldn't charge interest. And she borrowed money from me once for a sick sister in Guatemala. Of course, she's not even Jewish. I would dream of taking interest from a poor person who takes a loan for you. And that's why I think the Jewish Free Loan Society in LA is a pretty amazing institution because you can borrow money and they do not take any interest. You just pay it back, but there's no interest. Okay, I want to go to, oh, this is very interesting on 29, which we were just reading. 29, it says, where is it? You shall give me the firstborn of your sons. You shall not put off the skimming of the first yield of your vats. You shall give me the firstborn among your sons. So what does that mean? You shall give me the firstborn among your sons.
Pinya Ben?
Well, it is a pinyon haben, which means that you redeem your oldest son by giving the priest, the Kohen, 5 shekels or $5 silver or whatever. But what it means is that you should give your firstborn to serve God, to work in the temple, to be devoted to God. I think in the Catholic world, it would be like you always used to have one son who became a priest. You know, there would always be one in a big family that would end up becoming a priest or a daughter of nun. That's like a giving to God. It doesn't mean sacrifice or anything like that. But of course, Jews didn't want to do it. And they came up with this ceremony that I don't know if some of you have heard of called Pidyon Haben, which means redeeming of the son. And when your firstborn boy is 30 days old, you have the ceremony where you give it to a Kohen, and then you give the Kohen $5 silver and he gives them back to you. And it's a redemption it's a symbolic redemption because we don't have a temple. And maybe that started after the temple was destroyed. I don't even know if they did send them. It says the firstborn had special status. Oh, here's another commentary that it means that your oldest son had special status to perform sacred ceremonies. So maybe they were the one that did all the Jewish ceremonies at home, would be that. But it definitely didn't mean any kind of sacrifice. Okay. Miriam, you're so quiet today. Are you okay? You're muted.
There are times when I just enjoy listening
Okay.
to my fellow colleagues here
Okay.
and hear what they have to say.
So I want to look at Exodus 23 because this one I think is really powerful, which is verse 2 in Exodus 23. Oh, well, even let's start with verse 1. You shall not carry false rumors. You shall not join hands with the guilty to act as a malicious witness. You shall neither side with the mighty to do wrong. You shall not give perverse testimony in a dispute as to pervert it in favor of the mighty. You shall not show deference to a poor man in his dispute. I think this is so relevant to what's going on right now.
I was thinking,
Yes.
we're all thinking the same thing.
Right.
Impeachment hearings.
Yeah.
It says, you shall neither side with the mighty to do wrong and give perverse testimony in a dispute to pervert it in the favor of the mighty. To say the election was a fake or didn't happen, it's a perverting testimony. This is so relevant it's ageless in its time. So that is really a powerful thing that is in the Torah from like 3,000 years ago. And then it says, and if you have an enemy, I think it's interesting, right after that it says, when you encounter your enemy's ox or ass wandering, you must take it back to him. So no matter how much you're at odds, you're required to still return someone's property to him or her. And when you see the ass of your enemy lying under its burden and we refrain from raising it, you must nevertheless raise it with him. If you see your enemy and their car is broken down on the side of the road, you're not supposed to drive by. You're supposed to stop and help the person, no matter what. I mean, there's this idea of there's an ethical level of behavior, and we learn from the Hasidim, when you do a good deed, you elevate yourself. You don't just help someone else, but you continue to elevate your own soul. And that is the purpose of a lot of mitzvahs, not just to get brownie points or be a good person, but to elevate yourself and your soul and to get in touch with the purest part of yourself. So, okay.
Quick question? Or
Yes.
not enough time. I just wondered, these are such exquisitely humane laws. I wondered though, if anyone knows the history at that time, did the people actually follow them and live their lives according to this? Or
No.
is this wishful thinking? In the
Well,
best
no,
sense?
they were supposed to, and sometimes they did and sometimes they didn't. Just like today, sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. People, you know, we have these ethical laws and some people are criminals and crooks no matter what. That's why we have Yom Kippur. And according to the Midrash, before God created the world, he created a number of other things. And one of them was teshuvah, or repentance, because God already knew that we were going to mess up. And that gave us an opportunity or a pathway to repair. And so these are beautiful ideals. And
Or the slavery laws, I mean, like you have
yes,
to do this.
I
were
think
they followed?
yeah, I think the civil laws were part of the country, you know, of Israel. Yes, they were there and during that time. I think the ethical, moral laws, you know, we see the prophets talking about the same thing, you know, so we're constantly reaffirming it, and human beings, we have free will, we have free choice, and when we live an ethical, beautiful life, I mean, imagine if we lived this way, what a beautiful society we would have, the just society, if we followed these ethical laws. So it's 12:58, and I have to be honest with you, I've been teaching for 2.5 hours and I have to be at a doctor in a half an hour. So I'm gonna say Shabbat Shalom to you. It's for physical therapy, I'm fine.
Shabbat Shalom. This was
Could I add
wonderful.
something regarding the names? This
Yes.
is Karina. I fell, and so I don't want anybody to see my face. It looks worse than what it feels.
Hi.
So I'm just going to say something about the names. The question about the word Jew. So I did a little reading and researching, and they were all known as Judeans till the Roman exile.
Right.
When they were taken down to Rome as slaves, the Roman emperor at the time decided that the word Judea will be erased, and it turned to be Palestine, actually Palestina.
Right.
And it was because of the Philistine that
Right.
invaded the land and settled in the 7 shore cities. Gaza was one of them.
Right.
So that's where the word Palestina was developed. And then in the 13th century, there was a German Tsar that decided that the word Jew is going to be a derogatory word. And he made all the Jews put the Star of David on their buildings for the non-Jews to enter those buildings. So this is where the word Jew as a derogatory word, actually, instead of Judeo.
Judean, yeah.
Hebrews could be Hebrews. The word Hebrew was also one of our names because they came from the land of Ever. And so that Tsar started this whole business of putting the stars, the Jewish stars on the buildings for nobody to come in, and gave us this word Jew, and it was supposed to be, but now we carry it with a lot of pride.
We do.
And yes, and I always say that I'm an Israeli because that's the name of the country, and that's it. And you take it from there, any flavor that you want. This is usually the question comes up when they see my accent. The first thing they say is, "Where are you from?" And I say Israel, and I'm an Israeli, and this is it.
Right.
So,
Thank you.
So why don't you leave and we can talk among ourselves.
Yeah,
for a
I'm
few
gonna leave.
minutes.
You guys can
Yeah.
continue the conversation.
Okay,
Yeah.
bye-bye.
And have a nice
Good
week.
luck, good luck. And
Okay,
Shabbat
bye-bye.
Shalom, everyone.
Shabbat shalom.
Was it great?
Shalom to you.
Nina,
Yeah.
what accent?